Worms. They're the unsung hero of most gardens. Whether it's a compost pile or your bed, the one thing that most gardeners are looking for when they're planting their seedlings are worms. During this time of year when it's freezing outside and those worms dive deep, what do? As a gardener, it's either inside or it's outside. And if you're the kind that likes to do things on the inside, I'm going to show you here how to set up your very first extremely simple worm bin and give you a few little tips here and there how you can step it up and also what can be done to improve your indoor and outdoor garden. So before we dive deep into this, there's some terms that must be understood and gone over in order for you to be able to effectively go along with me as I explain the entire process. Now, the very first terms that we need to talk about are actually pretty simple. Those terms are castings, cocoons, chow, bedding, and prepared bedding. When you say bedding, it's typically any carbon-rich material that you put into the bed to absorb the nutrients that are in the foods that you're putting into this bin and that the worms are breaking down. The bedding that we're using in this video is predominantly leaves. I will chop up my leaves and specifically set them aside for my worm bin. And the better you chop these up, the easier it is for your worms to actually utilize them. When I say prepared bedding, I'm not talking about taking it and sticking it in the bin. That's too dry. Ideally, you want some type of life, or at least the basic building blocks of life for worm should be started before you get those worms. I took some chopped leaves and I mixed it up with some old soil that I had left over from my indoor plants. I also added some used coffee grounds that I got for free. Once you've mixed those all together and added a decent amount of water into the mix so that it's damp but not dripping, set that aside. You want to set that aside somewhere where it's nice and warm in a container that you can either make a lid for or that you have a lid for, and you want to let that sit. That ensures that not only is the moisture being distributed into the dried leaves, but the warmth will also start to kick off that microbial development and population increase that we're looking for. Castings, cocoons, and chow. Well, obviously castings is what we're after. They're the finished product. Cocoons, they're the egg sacs that the worms produce when they feel that they have enough room. Chow is another name for food. But the difference between the main food that you're going to be feeding your bin and what it is specifically is more extra food that they like to eat that makes them want to come up to the surface to feed, because that's where our food is. Usually they're made out of like ground up oats, or you can use old cereals. There's a wide range of things that can be used for this very purpose. So I'm going to point you guys to some sources at the very end that will be able to help you out more than this video. Believe it or not, you're going to need some tools for this. And I'm not talking about tools in the general sense of the word. I mean tools as in things that you're going to need to get yourself set up. And those tools are, you're going to need bins. You're going to need a bin for your worms. And I suggest a bin to mix things in, like your prepared bedding. You're going to need gloves because it's easier, especially when you're working with the worms. You'll likely want to use your hand to either stir things up or move things around inside the bin, so you're not hurting you have a less of a chance to hurt your worms doing it by hand versus any kind of a tool. You're going to need a sifter. So at the end of the process, after the stretch of time while your worms are processing all the food that you put into it over the months, you're going to need a way of filtering out all of their castings. So, although not needed right off the bat, a sifter is a very needed item. You're going to need a light source. And there's many reasons why, not only just to look around and be able to see what you're doing, but worms are light sensitive creatures. So when we build this bin, the first thing you want to do is for the first 2 days straight is keep that light on. That light will force them from the surface down into the bedding until they realize that this is their new home and don't feel like they need to get out because it's not the same substrate that you purchased them in. It doesn't take that long, and depending on the breed of the worms, which we're talking about red wigglers here, which we will also get to in a moment, some varieties of worms will be a fussy and flight ready worm to use, but we're going for easy. The last thing, small shovel. The small shovel can be used to scoop out your bedding from one container to another. It can be used to move your finished sifted castings when you're done into a container of your choice. But again, I would refrain from using it when working directly with your worm. Next thing we need to cover are materials. So the first material that we're going to talk about are browns. Browns can be anything that's carbon rich, like leaves or pine shavings. It could also be your cocoa core or your peat moss. The purpose of these are to soak up the nutrients in the food scraps that you're putting into your bin and hold on to it so that the worms can actually process it and that the microbiology can then refine it. Another good thing to get, and it's free, my kind of price, is used coffee grounds from coffee shops like Starbucks. They will readily give those to you, and I will add it in both my pre-composted worm bedding, which is what we're doing in this video, but also I supplement it with a feeding every single time that I'm adding food scraps. Sometimes you'll find mold on it, which is a good thing, and the mold and any kind of fungi are really what the worms are eating. So moldy coffee from Starbucks is a great idea, and it's free. I use old potting soil in it, and not just any potting soil. Any of my indoor starts that I do, the ones that don't make it, I let those plants just die off, and I set those pots on the side. So when it comes time for me to either A, start a new bin, or B, add to a new bin, and I need me some more browns for the scraps that I'm putting in, I will take that soil and add it right into the bin. Grit. Grit is very, very important to help the worms process any of the food bits that they are ingesting. You can use simple items like play stand, and as long as it's fine, the finer the better, because these worms have very tiny mouths. So the smaller the better. The other option you can do is eggshells that have been ground down to a powder by something like a coffee grinder. If you go out and buy one, I would say to get a coffee grinder from a secondhand store or Goodwill, because you're going to be putting these grinder in through hell. And the last thing you want to do is spend a large amount of money on something that you're more than likely going to end up killing. This right here is my double bin, and it's actually my first worm bin that I started. Actually, correction, it's probably my second. My first one failed miserably, but this one is going good. Now, the reason I'm showing you this before we get to the simple worm bin is because I wanted to show you what my preferred method of doing worm bins is and exactly why. We're also going to be taking worms from out of here and putting it into the brand new worm bin that I'm about to show you guys. Here's the lid, and this lid pretty much just keeps things from getting in there that I don't want. The way that I keep the condensation down, because if there's any kind of moisture on the sides, worms will follow it. The method that I found that best keeps them in is with this sheet of plastic. And really it's just folded over. It was way too big, but I wanted to use it anyways, and so that's what we're doing. Now if I open this up, and I'll probably have to bring you guys in to show you. Here's the worm bin once I take off the plastic, and if you can see, there are worms galore on this plastic, which is a good thing. We're going to just knock those guys off right quick. If some of them stay on, that's fine because they're just going to go back in the bin anyway. But here we go. A single sheet of plastic makes this so much easier, but only when it's cut to size. Here's where the gloves come in. So what we have here is the top end, and this one's been working for a while. They're still working on some of the food scraps that I threw in here, but believe it or not, this is not the most important. Oh, the other thing you might want to do is whenever you have any kind of sprouts or seeds in there that are viable, just randomly go in here and break them up so you kill them. That becomes food for the worms, and then you don't have to worry about things popping up in your bin. Look at the size of this guy. I'm sorry, this is what you would call a breeder worm. They're full size, and their clitellum, which is what makes the cocoon, it's there. It's just very slight because this is almost at max capacity, which is why we are making another bin. So what I'm going to do right now is go ahead and lift off this top bin, and I'm going to show you the important thing that's underneath here. So this is what we're going to do. Pull this up, and then lift. There might be a little suction, so we'll go slow. And when we get under there, we're going to check for worms. And look at all those worms. This is exactly what I wanted to have happen. So what I did was took some of my mixed up bedding, I threw it in here, I fed it a little bit, but what it does is it preconditions the worms bedding to be exactly like the bin, so that when I put it on top and restart this all over again, all these worms don't freak out because they're in their same bedding. This also has the benefit of providing them more space so they can start making cocoons again. I love this. This is why we're taking some of this to start the worm bin with instead of like a Walmart container of worms, because once you've got worms and they're breeding, you can pretty much keep multiplying the amounts that you have over and over again. So let's now get to the important bit, starting the bin. This is the container that we're going to be making into our bin today. And for refreshers, all that's in there right now is the leaves and the coffee grounds, and it's been moisturized and it's sat for a few days just to get it nice and moist. This is our starting bed for our worms. While I could just dump a bunch of worms into here as is with the level that it is, I have my other simple bin who really needs some bedding as well. So I'm going to take out some of this before we get started here. It doesn't really matter, you can just grab it. Now if you haven't had this sitting for about a week, what you're going to need to do is take your bare hands and stick it into the bedding just to make sure that it's not hot, because if it's hot it will hurt your worms. So it should be fine the way it is. Now it might look like I took out about half, yeah, roughly half. Now the thing is, we're going to start with this much, but it will quickly collapse as the worms work it, especially once they have basically colonized this bucket. What I'm not going to do for the first couple of days when I transport the worms, I am not going to feed them right away for a few reasons. First of all, not feeding them gives them a chance to dive down, claim this as home, and start figuring things out. The second thing, and the more important reason, going back to heat, this is just a stopgap. If it starts to heat up from the bedding that I add that the worms are already in, then I know there's a problem and I can stop and fix that problem. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go ahead, take some of the worms from the bin that I showed you before, and we're going to go ahead and give these puppies a brand new home. Alright, now that I've adjusted the bucket that we're going to be using, now it's time to introduce our worm. Like I said before, I pulled my worms from the bottom bin of my double stack. This may be more than worms than you would have gotten if you got, 3 containers from Walmart. It might be more. I don't know. And we're probably not going to be able to see them all, but I just wanted to show you guys that I am introducing them into the center of the bin. There we go. They're in. Now let's break up the soil a little bit so you can see it, or the bedding. And there's the worms. Hopefully you guys can see them pretty good. Let's see. There they are. You know what? Just because I'm feeling a little froggy, we're going to go ahead and pull out one more small handful. Alright, you can't see me doing it, but I am. This should be all the worms we need to get started in this bin. There should be enough adults and juvenile worms in here to make this thing a happy little bin that it needs to be. Now the final step in all of this is to leave your bin open with light on it of some sort or another for at least a day, day and a half. What this does is it makes sure that the worms will not try to escape and that they bury down into the brand new bin bedding. So you keep your worms in there, and then after that, at least with red wigglers, it should not be a problem after that. Okay, so here's my other simple bin that I have working right now, and of course you can see the most recent feeding right on top. When you first go to feed your worms, do not feed them this. What you want to do is give them just a little bit, maybe like a handful at first, because that's going to tell you within a week's time how much food they can actually eat. Because this doesn't have holes in it like my double stack bin does, that is going to be your main issue, is controlling moisture. It might feel dry on top, but the deeper you go, it's going to get more and more moist. Moisture is your friend right now, because the worms will populate faster in moist bedding. You just don't want it sopping wet. So since we've got that understood, when you go to make your first feeding, pretend like I just dropped a handful of food in there. You're going to put it on the surface. This is where your your crushed eggshells come in. This is where your worm chow that you can make comes in. Just sprinkle it on top after the food. That gives the worms grit. This is also going to help promote a more neutral pH in the bin. There's no special formula of how much to add, how little to add. That's all up to you. Then once we've done that, and you've also added maybe even your worm chow, that is when we're going to take some more prepared bedding and dress the top. And we're doing this for two reasons. The first reason is protecting the scraps that you put in from any kind of flying insects that may or may not fly around and try to get into your bin. Because believe it or not, this stuff will attract the flying insects, especially during the warm season. The second thing that it does is it gives you a barrier between the light and the food where the worms are, but it also provides covering to keep the moisture in. If it's dry, like you saw before I put the leaves on top, they will not eat it as fast. But once you bury it and the bedding itself is a little bit moist, they will come right up and eat that because they're not sensing the lights. Alright, now the final step before we can wrap this all up is quite simple. Find a piece of plastic that you can cut roughly to the size of the bin, and then also you can take some paper scraps. I just grab random paper scraps, I just lay them in there kind of like this, and then I lay it on top, and then this is just a dirty used napkin, I lay that on top like so, and then the plastic just sits on top like this. The paper that I put in there, that will actually soak up any kind of moisture that comes up and out of the bin, but it will also lock in the moisture in the very center, helping to keep your worm bin working. Now the edges, you can sort of kind of see, that might get a little dry. That's not a bad thing because that means oxygen can actually get into the bedding. You just want to try to cover up the surface so they have somewhere where it's constantly moist and you're not losing a ton of moisture coming out of your bin, because we are not going to close this all the way. You cannot close the bin lid, because if you do, they will crawl up and then you will have worms all on the top here and everywhere. Plus, it cuts down the oxygen, and I want it airy, but I also want them to be able to have a normal light source so they want to stay in without trying to come out. So that's where this comes in. This is just a piece of an egg carton, and I simply just lay it there, and then when I close the lid, it closes at about 45 degrees, and the lights from my grow room here shine in there when the lights are on, and the worms have a normal day-night cycle. But they do never come out. They never ever come out. So as long as that stays open, I haven't had any problems whatsoever. So I guess it's about this point right here where you're asking yourself, what is the timeline on when I can expect my very first castings from my worm bin? And the truth really is, it depends. The reason it depends is on a few factors. One, the population. It takes a while to build up a worm bin, and that could be on a scale of months before you really notice a difference in population. The second thing, temperature. The more constant the temperature you can keep it, the better they perform. I keep mine indoors, so the indoor temperature year-round is the same, which is right in their butter zone. So if you want to, I would suggest keeping them indoors. The cat litter bin doesn't take up much space, and provided that there's some kind of light there so that the worms know when they've gone to the surface and need to go back down, there shouldn't be any problems. Another thing that could come into play, feeding schedule. At first, you're not going to be able to feed these guys very much because there's just not enough worms. But eventually, once the population has grown enough, they'll be able to take down quite a bit of food and probably do it within a week or maybe 2 weeks time. And that's all beneficial for formation of your worm castings. So rough scale, it's either between 6 months and 9 months. And that really is how I harvest my castings even after the first. So every 6 months, I'll check my bin. It's pretty heavy by then, so I know it's ready to harvest some castings. Now, your mileage will vary, and I suggest using the red wigglers because they're less fuss, they try to leave your bin less, and they're the de facto composter worm. There are other worms, but I don't know anything about those other ones really as far as the management and taking care of them. There are many other people out there that I've learned my information from, and so here in the end, I'm going to go ahead and let you know exactly who those people are. And on top of that, I'm still learning, guys. And I promise you, you might run into some stumbling blocks along the way, but once you've got this dialed in for the most part, you're good. So, to finish this off properly, we're going to have to go back downstairs and see what all the information that I still have for you guys to get you going. I wanted to leave you guys with a few people that you can go to for more information as far as worm bins go. Everybody has different styles of creators that speak to them, and my information here might not be your cup of tea. So I'm going to give you a decent list of individuals in a wide spectrum of presentation styles that may suit you better than others. So those creators that have helped me along in my learning of farming worms are the following: the Worm and Garden Lady, AJ's Green Topics, the LP Dimension, the Urban Worm Company, Rockin' Worms, AV, Vermicompost, and Cedar Song Farm. All of those creators are going to be listed in the description of the video, so please go down there, check them out, and let them know that I sent you. Well, I hope this helps those of you who have no idea about how to start up a worm bin or knew anything really about vermicomposting. I just wanted to go ahead and put this info out there because I feel like having worm castings is a very worthwhile endeavor. Plus, you learn some things along the way. And on top of that, you'll have castings of your own if you start now by fall. What's better than having those fall vegetables having a layer of worm castings added to their surface to increase the nutrients and the biology into the soil? I promise you, when you get to that point in time, it's going to feel like you're cheating. But you're not. You just did the work ahead of time. So, I'm your boy, Big Wheel Dog 82, in the soil. And I'm out of here, guys. Happy worming. Catch you later.